What if the darkness between the stars is not empty space, but a shadow cast by something actively draining a sun of its core energy? In October 2015, the astronomy community faced an anomaly that fractured conventional astrophysics. Data retrieved from the Kepler Space Telescope, spanning 4 years of deep space observation, revealed an ordinary F-type main-sequence star, designated KIC 8462852, located 1,470 light-years from Earth. The anomaly was mathematically impossible under our current understanding of celestial mechanics. A Jupiter-sized planet blocking a star produces a 1% dip in starlight, occurring in strict, predictable intervals. This star experienced erratic, chaotic dimming episodes, plunging by 22%. There was no predictable orbit. There was no thermal radiation suggesting shattered planets. The complete absence of infrared excess effectively dismantled every natural explanation involving asteroid collisions or cosmic dust. We are left looking at a void that perfectly aligns with theoretical frameworks proposed in 1960 by Freeman Dyson. A massive artificial megastructure built by a Kardashev Type II civilization, actively harvesting the output of a living star. Historical astronomical plates dating back to the late 19th century were pulled from the Harvard archives, confirming this star has been steadily fading for over a century, a phenomenon never recorded in the history of stellar observation. The data is real, heavily scrutinized by Yale and Penn State astrophysicists, and the debate continues to rage within the highest tiers of the scientific community. The truth behind these chaotic transits will permanently alter our understanding of stellar physics or prove we are looking at the architectural footprint of a supreme cosmic intelligence. We will systematically dissect the Kepler telemetry, dismantle the failing natural hypotheses, and examine the terrifying mechanical reality of a Dyson Swarm. Welcome to Dozing Universe, where we navigate the quiet mysteries lingering in the dark corners of reality. If you seek the truth hidden within the cosmic silence, subscribe to the channel, engage with the evidence in the comments, and journey with us into the unexplained. To understand the magnitude of the anomaly surrounding this specific celestial body, it is necessary to first examine the architecture of our own observation. Human vision is inherently flawed. It is a biological instrument prone to optical illusion, psychological compensation, and strict limitations in the electromagnetic spectrum. To look into the deep universe and extract objective truth, astrophysicists rely entirely on the cold, unfeeling precision of silicon sensors and rigid mathematical algorithms. In March 2009, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration launched a heavy payload into an Earth-trailing heliocentric orbit. This was the Kepler Space Telescope, an observatory engineered and dedicated to a single, grueling directive. It was not designed to capture breathtaking, colorful images of expanding nebulae or colliding galaxies. Kepler was fundamentally a highly specialized photometer. It was an incredibly sensitive light meter attached to a 0.95-meter Schmidt telescope, designed to do nothing but stare relentlessly at a fixed patch of space spanning the Cygnus and Lyra constellations. For 4 uninterrupted years, it watched 150,000 stars simultaneously. It did not adjust its gaze. It did not turn away. It merely collected photons crossing the vacuum of space, converted them into electrons via 42 individual charge-coupled devices, and measured the exact brightness of every single star in its wide field of view every 30 minutes. The methodology behind this ambitious mission is known in astrophysics as transit photometry. The conceptual framework is brutally simple, yet its physical execution requires engineering operating at the absolute limit of modern capability. When an exoplanet orbits its host star, there is a statistical probability that its orbital plane will align perfectly with our line of sight from Earth. When this planetary body passes between the telescope and the stellar surface, it blocks a minuscule fraction of the star's emitted light. By continuously measuring the star's brightness over an extended period, astronomers plot a graph known as a light curve. Under normal circumstances, a stellar light curve is a flat, continuous horizontal line representing the baseline luminosity of the star. When a planetary transit occurs, this line dips, creating a very distinct, symmetrical U-shape. The light drops smoothly as the planet's spherical leading edge crosses the stellar disk, stays relatively flat at the bottom of the curve as the planet moves across the center, and rises back to normal baseline luminosity as the trailing edge exits the transit zone. The geometry of a planetary transit is strict and unforgiving. It is governed entirely by the laws of orbital mechanics and gravity, meaning these transits occur with absolute mathematical regularity. If a transit happens every 365 days, the data confirms the existence of an Earth-like orbit. The depth of the U-shaped curve tells astronomers the exact physical diameter of the transiting planet relative to its host star. This is where the sheer scale of the universe becomes a critical factor in dissecting the anomaly of KIC 8462852. A star is an immense, raging furnace of continuous nuclear fusion, while planets are microscopic specks of cold dust and gas in comparison. If a theoretical observer were looking at our sun from thousands of light years away, and the Earth passed directly in front of it, the total light output of the sun would drop by approximately 0.01%. It is a change so faint, so infinitesimally small, that it is equivalent to measuring the change in illumination when a single mosquito flies across the lens of an industrial searchlight located hundreds of miles away. It requires instruments operating in the freezing, absolute vacuum of space to detect this fractional dimming without the severe distortion caused by Earth's atmosphere. If our largest planet, Jupiter, a massive gas giant, were to transit the Sun, the light would drop by exactly 1%. 1% is the critical benchmark in transit photometry. It is the maximum expected dimming caused by a naturally forming planetary body within a solar system. Among the 150,000 stars monitored by the Kepler hardware was KIC 8462852. This star sits 1,470 light-years away from our solar system. Because light travels at a finite speed, the data collected by the telescope reveals the star exactly as it existed nearly a millennium and a half ago, during the temporal equivalent of the fall of the Western Roman Empire. The star itself is classified as an F-type main sequence star. This is a crucial detail. An F-type star is significantly hotter, vastly brighter, and approximately 50% more massive than our own yellow G-type sun. It is a mature, incredibly stable celestial engine, burning hydrogen into helium in its core. It is not a young, volatile protostar still surrounded by a chaotic, swirling protoplanetary disk of unformed matter. Nor is it a dying star, violently pulsating, expanding, and shedding its outer layers into the void. It emits a steady, powerful stream of continuous energy. The volume of telemetry transmitted back to Earth from the Kepler Space Telescope was astronomical. It was entirely impossible for human astronomers to manually review the light curves of 150,000 stars. Therefore, the raw data was fed into automated computer pipelines. These highly sophisticated computers were programmed specifically to search for those signature 1% dips. They utilized complex algorithms designed to meticulously filter out internal instrument noise, correct for thermal variations in the spacecraft, and highlight periodic, symmetrical U-shapes that indicated a planet. When the 4 years of telemetry from KIC 8462852 flowed through these terrestrial servers, the automated algorithms registered nothing of interest. The computer programs failed entirely to flag the star as an anomaly because the software was built strictly upon the fundamental laws of orbital mechanics. Computers are designed to identify order. They search for predictable mathematical patterns. What the telescope actually recorded from this distant F-type star was a manifestation of pure, unadulterated chaos. The light curves retrieved from this star did not drop by 0.01%. They did not drop by the benchmark 1%. During multiple erratic episodes spanning the 4-year observation window, the luminous output of KIC 8462852 plummeted by 15%, and during one massive, inexplicable event, the light dropped by an astonishing 22%. This metric cannot be easily dismissed or attributed to an optical glitch. A 22% reduction in the luminous output of a star, 50% larger than our Sun, shatters every known model of planetary formation and celestial mechanics. To physically block that staggering volume of starlight, whatever object or structure passed in front of the star had to be immense beyond planetary comprehension. It had to possess a solid surface area, roughly half the width of the star itself. The immediate logical assumption might be the existence of a simply colossal planet, a gas giant exponentially larger than Jupiter. However, the strict laws of thermodynamics and hydrostatic equilibrium prohibit this existence. A gas giant cannot simply scale up its diameter indefinitely. As a gaseous planetary body accumulates more mass from a solar nebula, its internal gravity compresses its core with increasing violence. The planet does not grow significantly wider in physical size. It merely becomes exponentially denser. If a planetary body were to somehow gather enough mass to reach the physical dimensions required to block 22% of an F-type star, the extreme pressure and temperature in its core would cross a critical threshold. It would trigger internal nuclear fusion. The object would violently ignite. It would no longer be a planet. It would be a secondary star, fundamentally transforming KIC 8462852 into a binary star system. But the Kepler data is definitive. KIC 8462852 is an isolated star. The telescope detected no secondary light source, no gravitational wobble indicating a binary companion, and no secondary stellar emission. Furthermore, the mechanics of the transits themselves defied natural geometry. The massive dips in stellar light were completely asymmetrical. They did not form the neat, curved U-shapes characteristic of a solid, spherical body transiting a light source. The recorded light curves were violently jagged, highly irregular, and completely disproportionate. The star's light would drop slowly, then abruptly plummet at a vertical angle, jitter erratically at the bottom of the curve, and rise back up to baseline in an uneven, staggered pattern. This precise data signature indicates that whatever is blocking the star is not a sphere. It is an amorphous, highly irregular geometric shape, or perhaps a massive, dispersed cluster of distinct, sprawling structures moving in a synchronized but uncoordinated formation. Most critically, these transit events were entirely non-periodic. A natural planet locked in a stable gravitational orbit will transit its host star at exact, mathematically predictable intervals. The extreme dimming events of KIC 8462852 occurred at completely random intervals. They were separated by tens of days, then hundreds of days, sometimes occurring in rapid, clustered succession, only to vanish entirely from the data stream for years at a time. There was no gravitational rhythm. There was no Keplerian orbit. The Kepler Space Telescope operated flawlessly. The data telemetry was meticulously calibrated, verified by multiple independent teams, and re-verified. All potential instrument noise was mathematically isolated and removed. The 22% drop is not an error. It is an objective, undeniable physical reality occurring 1,470 light-years away. We are faced with a stable, mature star that is being periodically obscured by an entity that cannot be a planet, cannot be a secondary star, possesses a highly irregular geometry, and moves in complete defiance of orbital predictability. The automated algorithms missed this massive anomaly because they were strictly searching for the predictable clockwork of the natural cosmos. It required a different kind of observation to realize that the rules of celestial mechanics had been fundamentally broken in this dark sector of the sky. When sophisticated algorithms fail, the burden of discovery often reverts to the raw, evolutionary processing power of the human mind. The telemetry from KIC 8462852 had been discarded by the automated pipelines, because computers are built to recognize order, while the universe occasionally manifests pure anomaly. Because the volume of data collected by the Kepler Space Telescope was too massive for any single team of astronomers to manually process, Yale University initiated a citizen science project known as Planet Hunters. This platform allowed ordinary individuals, hundreds of thousands of volunteers from around the globe, to access the raw, unclassified light curves and visually inspect them. The human brain is an apex pattern recognition engine. Over millions of years, biological vision evolved specifically to detect irregularities, sudden movements, and asymmetrical shapes in complex environments to ensure survival. A computer algorithm will ruthlessly filter out a data point if it does not fit a strictly defined mathematical parameter of a U-shaped planetary transit. A human being, however, will look at a jagged, chaotic line on a graph and instinctively recognize that something is fundamentally wrong. In 2011, citizen scientists analyzing the Kepler data stream began flagging the light curves of KIC 8462852. They did not categorize it as a potential exoplanet. They marked the data with notes expressing profound confusion, utilizing the internal project acronym WTF, which ostensibly stood for Where is the Flux?, a reference to the missing luminous flux of the star. These persistent, baffled reports eventually reached Dr. Tabitha Boyajian, an astrophysicist managing the Planet Hunters project at Yale. When her team pulled the raw telemetry and stripped away the automated filters, they did not find a minor calibration error or a simple false positive. They found a timeline of events that systematically dismantled every established rule of stellar observation. The anomaly was not a single, isolated event, but a terrifying progression of escalating darkness spanning years. The first undeniable rupture in the data occurred near the 800th day of the Kepler observation mission. Astronomers refer to this as the Day 800 event. During this period, the star underwent a massive, irregular dimming episode that lasted for a staggering several days. The light output plummeted by exactly 15%. The shape of this drop was highly disturbing. If a massive dark sphere had passed in front of the star, the light curve would have dropped smoothly and symmetrically. Instead, the Day 800 transit was severely asymmetrical. The starlight faded gradually, as if a thin, dispersed leading edge of material was slowly encroaching upon the stellar disk, and then it plummeted sharply, creating a harsh, vertical cliff in the data, before slowly staggering back to baseline luminosity. The geometric implication of this specific shape is unavoidable. Whatever blocked the light was not round. It possessed a sharply defined, solid trailing edge, but a diffuse, uneven leading edge, resembling the silhouette of an immense, shattered structure or a comet with an impossible, planet-sized tail. But the true magnitude of the anomaly did not reveal itself until hundreds of days later. Following the Day 800 event, the star returned to its normal, uninterrupted brilliance. There was no mathematical periodicity. A planet orbiting a star must return to block the light again at an exact interval dictated by its gravitational velocity. The entity orbiting Tabby's star vanished completely, seemingly defying the laws of orbital mechanics. Then, on day 1500 of the mission, the data stream erupted into absolute chaos. This was not a single transit. It was a rapid, violent cluster of severe dimming events happening in quick succession over a period of 100 days. The light dropped by 8%, rapidly recovered, immediately crashed by a catastrophic 22%, jittered erratically at the bottom of the curve, and then experienced a barrage of smaller, overlapping 3% dips. The entire baseline luminosity of the star was obliterated by what appeared to be a sprawling, uncoordinated swarm of massive objects passing in front of it. The complexity of the day 1500 cluster proved definitively that the scientific community was not looking at a single celestial body. They were looking at an entire system of distinct, enormous structures, varying wildly in size, shape, and opacity, all moving independently, yet concentrated in a single, terrifyingly dense formation. The sheer physical scale required to block 22% of an F-type star means that these individual components, whatever they were, had to possess surface areas dwarfing the entire Earth, scattered across millions of miles of empty space. The team meticulously analyzed the telescope hardware, searching for a cracked lens, a failing sensor, or a software glitch. They found nothing. The Kepler machinery was operating with flawless, cold precision. The darkness was real. The missing light had been physically obstructed by something existing 1,470 light-years away, and the astronomical community was forced to confront the chilling reality that they had discovered a shadow that should not exist. When faced with data that actively dismantled established astronomical paradigms, the immediate instinct of the scientific establishment was not to embrace the extraordinary, but to rigorously defend the mundane. The scientific method is fundamentally conservative, designed to exhaust every conceivable natural explanation before admitting the possibility of an artificial anomaly. Following the day 1500 cluster, astrophysicists initiated a systematic interrogation of the physical systems involved, beginning with the hardware itself. The Kepler Space Telescope is an incredibly complex orbital observatory, and the complex machinery is inherently prone to degradation. The focal plane array of the telescope consisted of 42 specialized charge-coupled devices, essentially advanced digital camera sensors continuously bombarded by the harsh radiation of deep space. It was highly plausible that a high-energy cosmic ray had struck the specific pixels monitoring KIC 8462852, causing a temporary electronic malfunction that the automated systems recorded as a massive drop in light. Alternatively, a micrometeoroid impact on the telescope's external housing, or a thermal fluctuation within the spacecraft, could theoretically introduce artifacts into the telemetry. However, the architecture of Kepler's data collection allowed for rigorous cross-referencing. If a sensor array was failing or experiencing a thermal glitch, the anomaly would not be isolated. Every adjacent star being monitored by that same cluster of pixels would simultaneously display identical, erroneous light curves. Astronomers painstakingly analyzed the background stars situated in the immediate vicinity of Tabby's star. The results were undeniable. While the light from KIC 8462852 was plunging into chaotic, jagged canyons of darkness, the neighboring stars remained perfectly stable, burning with uninterrupted mathematical precision. The shadow was not an optical illusion generated by a dying telescope. It was a localized, physical event occurring explicitly within the gravitational domain of that specific F-type star. With the integrity of the hardware verified, the scientific community turned to the most violent mechanisms the natural universe could provide. The leading hypothesis shifted to a cataclysmic, planetary-scale collision. The cosmos is not a peaceful void. It is a kinetic arena governed by gravitational forces that occasionally drive massive celestial bodies into devastating intersections. In the turbulent early phases of a star system's life, planetary orbits can become unstable. If two massive planets, perhaps super-Earths or the dense rocky cores of gas giants, were to collide, the resulting release of kinetic energy would be apocalyptic. The sheer physical trauma of the impact would shatter planetary mantles, instantly vaporize vast oceans, and eject billions of tons of pulverized rock, molten core fragments, and dense clouds of silicate dust into orbit. Over time, this localized debris field would shear apart under the gravitational pull of the host star, stretching into an immense, chaotic, and irregular cloud of ruin. As this sprawling wreckage passed between the star and the Kepler telescope, it would theoretically produce the exact jagged, asymmetrical, and non-periodic light curves observed in the telemetry. A shattered planet is not a neat geometric sphere. It is an evolving, amorphous swarm of debris capable of obscuring massive portions of starlight. It was a violent but perfectly natural explanation that seemed to satisfy the geometric requirements of the anomaly. Yet, this hypothesis walked blindly into an inescapable trap set by the fundamental, unbreakable laws of thermodynamics. Energy in the universe cannot be destroyed. It can only change form or be transferred. An F-type main sequence star is an incredibly powerful nuclear furnace, and its visible light is a manifestation of pure radiating energy. If an immense, sprawling cloud of pulverized rock and dust is sitting close enough to the star to physically block 22% of its visible light, that debris field is actively absorbing an unfathomable amount of stellar radiation. Because the vacuum of space lacks an atmosphere, the dust cannot cool through convection or conduction. It can only shed this accumulating thermal load through radiation. According to the strict laws of black body radiation, any object possessing heat must emit thermal energy into the surrounding space. In the electromagnetic spectrum, this thermal emission is invisible to human eyes, manifesting as infrared light. If a planetary collision had occurred, the resulting debris cloud would be fiercely absorbing the star's energy and glowing intensely in the infrared spectrum. To test this definitive thermodynamic requirement, astronomers redirected the Spitzer Space Telescope to observe KIC 846-2852. Unlike Kepler, which was designed to monitor visible light, Spitzer was a cryogenic observatory. Its highly sensitive instruments were actively cooled by liquid helium to temperatures near absolute zero, allowing it to detect the faintest traces of heat radiating across the deep cosmos. If a massive dusty debris field was responsible for the shadows, Spitzer would undoubtedly detect a massive spike in infrared radiation, a phenomenon known in astrophysics as an infrared excess. The scientific community waited for the thermal signature of a murdered planet to validate their models. The telemetry returned with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the astronomical establishment. There was absolutely no infrared excess. The thermal signature of the system was completely normal, indicating a clean, mature F-type star surrounded by empty space. The exact location where a massive debris cloud should be intensely radiating absorbed heat was completely, inexplicably cold. This singular, devastating data point was an executioner's blow to the planetary collision model. Natural rock and cosmic dust cannot absorb 22% of a star's luminous output without heating up and radiating that energy away. Furthermore, an alternative natural theory proposing an interstellar dust storm, a wandering cloud of cold nebular gas drifting through the dark void between our solar system and the star, was also dismantled by the behavior of the light itself. When microscopic dust particles block starlight, they do not block all wavelengths equally. They scatter the shorter blue wavelengths of light much more efficiently than the longer red wavelengths, a phenomenon known as Rayleigh scattering, which is the same physical mechanism that makes sunsets on Earth appear red. If a dust cloud were obscuring Tabby's star, the remaining light reaching Earth would appear noticeably reddened. However, subsequent multispectral observations revealed that the dimming events blocked all wavelengths of light simultaneously and equally. The shadow was not acting like a filtering cloud of translucent dust. It was acting like a solid, entirely opaque wall. The laws of physics dictated a terrifying paradox. The entity obstructing the light was large enough to eclipse nearly a quarter of a massive sun, solid enough to block all wavelengths of light equally, yet entirely devoid of the thermal radiation required by the laws of thermodynamics. It was acting like a flawless thermodynamic sink, absorbing colossal amounts of stellar energy without radiating a detectable fraction of it away as waste heat. Conventional astrophysics offers no natural material capable of this behavior. Only highly advanced, theoretically engineered materials designed specifically to capture, contain, and immediately convert stellar radiation directly into usable power could remain thermally invisible while casting a shadow of that magnitude. As the natural models collapsed one by one under the weight of missing heat and opaque geometry, the scientific community was forced to look into the void and acknowledge that the remaining explanations no longer belong to the realm of natural phenomena. Before entirely surrendering to the terrifying implications of a synthetic megastructure, the astrophysical community deployed one final, desperate theoretical defense against the anomaly. With a planetary collision model shattered by the absence of thermal radiation and the interstellar dust cloud theory dismantled by uniform light absorption, they required a mechanism capable of producing colossal, irregular shadows on wildly unpredictable timetables while leaving behind no permanent infrared footprint. The only remaining natural life raft was the exocomet hypothesis. In our own solar system, the Oort cloud exists as a vast, spherical shell of icy debris lingering in the freezing darkness at the extreme edge of the sun's gravitational influence. Occasionally, a gravitational perturbation, perhaps a passing rogue star, or a massive unseen planetary body, will dislodge these dormant ice mountains, sending them plunging inward toward the inner solar system on highly elliptical, entirely unpredictable trajectories. As a comet approaches a host star, the intense solar radiation vaporizes its icy exterior, creating a massive, glowing atmosphere known as a coma, and violently ejecting a sprawling tail of gas and dust that can stretch for millions of miles into the void. The physical geometry of a disintegrating comet perfectly matches the asymmetrical data recorded by the Kepler Space Telescope. A comet possesses a solid, dense nucleus at its core, but its expansive tail is diffuse, trailing, and increasingly transparent. If a massive comet were to cross the face of KIC 8462852, its thin, leading edge of outgassing material would cause a gradual, staggering dip in starlight, followed immediately by a sharp, vertical cliff in the data as the dense nucleus passed, exactly mirroring the bizarre, jagged shape of the Day 800 transit event. Furthermore, because comets travel on extreme elongated paths, they do not orbit in tight, predictable circles. They dive aggressively toward the star, whip around it at terrifying velocities, and are slingshot back into the freezing void of deep space, not to return for hundreds or perhaps thousands of years. This extreme orbital mechanic neatly explained why the dimming events were completely non-periodic and why the star experienced long intervals of uninterrupted brilliance. If the dust and debris were quickly blown outward by the sheer kinetic force of the F-type star's solar wind, or if the comets spent the vast majority of their existence in the freezing outer reaches of the system, it could theoretically account for the lack of a permanent, glowing infrared excess. It was a model that technically satisfied the immediate physical requirements of the anomaly, and the scientific establishment seized upon it with profound relief because it was a chaotic, violent, but fundamentally natural explanation. However, when astronomers subjected this hypothesis to the unforgiving scrutiny of mathematical probability, the comet theory began to violently unravel. The core issue was not the mechanics of a single comet, but the staggering, incomprehensible scale required to execute a shadow of that magnitude. To physically block 22% of the luminous output of a star that is significantly larger than our Sun, a single comet or even a dozen comets is mathematically insufficient. The volume of obstructing material required is astronomical. The leading astrophysicists calculated that to replicate the catastrophic dimming events of the Day 1500 cluster, the star would have to be swarmed by a synchronized armada of at least 648,000 giant comets, each one measuring up to 120 miles in diameter. This represents a mass of clustered cometary material exponentially greater than anything ever observed or theorized in our local stellar neighborhood. These hundreds of thousands of colossal ice mountains would have had to travel from the outer edges of the system, tightly clustered together, and plunge precisely between the star and the incredibly narrow field of view of the Kepler telescope at the exact moment humanity happened to be watching. The universe is nearly 14 billion years old. The Kepler mission monitored this specific patch of sky for merely 4 years. The statistical probability of Earth observing the exact, fleeting geological microsecond in which nearly 1 million giant comets orchestrate a perfectly timed, apocalyptic dive into their host star is essentially zero. It is a mathematical absurdity that borders on the miraculous, requiring an alignment of extreme cosmic coincidences so staggering that it strains the very limits of scientific credibility. The exocomet hypothesis is not a robust, scientifically elegant solution. It is a desperate theoretical construct engineered specifically to avoid a much darker, far more terrifying conclusion. The scientific method is intrinsically biased against the artificial, demanding that researchers accept astronomically improbable natural coincidences before they are permitted to consider the existence of non-human intelligence. Yet, the foundational principle of logical deduction, which dictates that the simplest explanation fitting the facts is usually the correct one, brutally penalizes the comet theory. Is it truly simpler to believe in a synchronized, mathematically impossible swarm of 1 million phantom comets that miraculously leave no permanent thermal trace? Or is it more logical to accept that the data is an exact, literal representation of a massive, solid geometry? The establishment clung to the comets because the alternative requires the total abandonment of our perceived dominance in the universe. But as the statistical models of the comet armada collapsed under their own impossible weight, the silent, terrifying shadow over the star remained, pointing relentlessly toward a single, synthetic explanation that had been theorized half a century earlier. When the natural mechanics of the universe failed to provide a mathematically viable explanation for an anomaly, observation must cross the threshold into the realm of theoretical astrobiology and the physics of advanced civilizations. To comprehend what might be casting a shadow vast enough to eclipse 22% of a massive star, we must first understand the fundamental currency of the cosmos. That currency is not territory, and it is not time. The ultimate currency of the universe is energy. Every biological organism, from the simplest single-celled bacteria to the most complex neurological network of a human brain, is fundamentally an engine designed to extract, convert, and utilize energy to maintain order against the constant, degrading pull of entropy. A technological civilization is merely a biological engine scaled up to a planetary magnitude. If we trace the trajectory of human history, it is not truly a timeline of political empires or ideological conflicts. It is a timeline of our escalating capacity to harvest energy. We began by burning carbon in the form of wood and coal, advanced to splitting the atomic nucleus, and are currently attempting to replicate the nuclear fusion of the sun within terrestrial reactors. As an intelligence expands, its thirst for power grows exponentially. In 1964, a Soviet astronomer named Nikolai Kardashev recognized this inescapable biological and physical law. Operating during the height of the Cold War, an era defined by the rapid acceleration of nuclear technology and the dawn of radio astronomy, Kardashev was attempting to calculate the power requirements for a hypothetical alien civilization to transmit a radio signal across the immense, silent expanse of the Milky Way galaxy. He realized that a society's level of technological advancement could be classified strictly by the magnitude of energy it is capable of harnessing. He developed a theoretical framework that has since become the cornerstone of modern astrophysics when discussing extraterrestrial intelligence, known as the Kardashev scale. This scale does not measure a civilization by its culture, its morality, or its biological form. It measures them solely by their thermodynamic footprint. Kardashev proposed 3 distinct tiers of cosmic evolution. A Type I civilization is defined as a planetary society. This is an intelligence that has successfully mastered and harnessed the total available energy of its home world. They command the kinetic energy of every ocean current, capture the atmospheric power of every hurricane, and draw immense geothermal heat directly from the molten core of their planet. They have absolute dominion over their biosphere, capable of controlling the weather, engineering their planetary climate, and utilizing every photon of sunlight that strikes their atmosphere. By contrast, humanity in the early 21st century is not even on the scale. We are currently calculated to be a Type 0.73 civilization. We are a fractured, primitive species still relying on the combustion of a fossilized biological matter, entirely vulnerable to the natural whims of our planet and incapable of capturing even a fraction of the sunlight that hits the Earth. Yet, even if a civilization achieves Type I status and masters its planet, it eventually encounters an insurmountable physical bottleneck. A planet is a closed, finite system. It only intercepts a microscopic fraction of the energy radiated by its host star. For example, our sun detonates the equivalent of billions of nuclear weapons every second, radiating an unfathomable volume of power in all directions. The Earth, being a tiny speck of rock located 93 million miles away, captures roughly 1/billionth of that output. The remaining 99.99% of the star's energy is blasted uselessly into the freezing void of deep space. For an expanding, hyper-advanced intelligence, this is an unacceptable thermodynamic waste. As a Type I civilization exhausts its planetary resources, expands its population, and pushes the limits of its computing power, it faces a stark, existential ultimatum. It can either halt its progress, strictly control its biological expansion, and stagnate within the confines of its planetary cradle, or it can fundamentally rewrite the architecture of its solar system. To break the planetary limit, the civilization must evolve into a Type II civilization. This transition represents a leap in engineering and ambition that is almost beyond human comprehension. A Type II civilization is an intelligence that has successfully captured the total energetic output of its host star. They are no longer a planetary species. They are a stellar empire. The volume of power commanded by a Type II civilization is approximately 10 billion times greater than that of a Type I society. To understand the necessity of this terrifying leap, we must consider what an intelligence requires such colossal energy for. An intelligence operating at the Type II level is not simply powering cities or launching spacecraft. They are likely running planetary-sized supercomputers, simulating entirely synthetic universes. They might be manipulating the gravitational fabric of space-time to achieve faster-than-light transit, or physically engineering the biological immortality of their species. Most importantly, command of a stellar energy provides the ultimate defense against the random, violent mechanics of the cosmos. A species confined to a single planet is merely waiting for a localized extinction event. A wandering black hole, a massive asteroid impact, or the deadly radiation of a nearby supernova can instantly erase millions of years of evolutionary progress. A Type II civilization possesses the energetic capacity to physically move planets out of orbit, deflect cosmic threats, or even construct completely artificial habitats immune to natural disaster. The transition to a stellar society is not driven by mere curiosity. It is driven by the absolute, uncompromising biological imperative to survive the deep time of the universe. When we look at the raw telemetry radiating from KIC 846285 we are looking at an F-type main sequence star. It is 50% larger, significantly hotter, and vastly more luminous than our own Sun. It is an immense, stable, and incredibly potent nuclear engine, representing an ocean of untapped power. The catastrophic 22% drop in its light output, the bizarre, jagged asymmetry of the shadows, and the complete lack of thermal waste heat all converge on a single, terrifying intersection of data. The anomaly does not fit the profile of shattered rocks or drifting dust. It fits the exact thermodynamic and geometric profile of a Type II civilization actively dismantling the natural architecture of their system to harvest the Sun. The chaotic light curves recorded by the Kepler telescope are not the result of natural destruction. They are the shadows of artificial construction. We are witnessing the astronomical footprint of an intelligence that has left its planetary boundary and is currently in the process of building the ultimate thermodynamic machine, systematically enclosing their host star to capture the light before it escapes into the void. The scientific community recoils from this hypothesis because it forces humanity to confront its own profound insignificance. If a Type II civilization exists 1,470 light-years away, possessing the capability to engineer structures the size of stars, then our entire terrestrial existence, our history, and our technology are reduced to the equivalent of an ant colony unaware of the human civilization building a highway over its nest. Yet, the mathematical truth remains. The F-type star is fading. The energy is being intercepted, contained, and utilized by an entity that operates on a scale of engineering that treats entire planets as raw building materials. To understand exactly how a civilization could physically execute the capture of a star, we must examine the specific mechanical blueprints theorized by physicists, blueprints that perfectly map onto the shattered, erratic light curves hiding in the Kepler data. The concept of a celestial megastructure was not born in the realm of speculative fiction, but within the rigorous mathematical confines of a 1960 paper published in the journal Science by theoretical physicist Freeman Dyson. Tasked with predicting how humanity might eventually detect hyper-advanced extraterrestrial intelligence, Dyson completely bypassed the search for intercepted radio communications, arguing that advanced civilizations would eventually optimize their energy consumption to a point where they would construct massive physical enclosures around their host stars. This theoretical architecture became known universally as the Dyson sphere. However, the popular culture interpretation of this concept often visualizes a solid, rigid shell completely encasing a star. This is a fundamental physical impossibility. A solid, unbroken sphere cannot exist because the sheer gravitational stress exerted by the central star, combined with the lack of structural tension on the polar regions of the shell, would cause the entire construct to violently collapse inward and instantly incinerate. Dyson himself never proposed a solid shell. He proposed a highly complex dynamic system known as a Dyson Swarm. A Dyson Swarm is an incredibly dense, sprawling network of millions, perhaps billions, of independent orbital structures, solar collectors, and artificial habitats moving in highly synchronized, overlapping orbits around the star. The purpose of this swarm is to intercept every possible trajectory of starlight, creating a synthetic web that effectively captures the star's total thermodynamic output without violating the laws of orbital mechanics. To comprehend how a Kardashev Type II civilization physically engineers such a structure, we must evaluate the sheer scale of the construction process. A civilization cannot simply manifest a Dyson Swarm out of the vacuum. They require an astronomical volume of raw material. The construction protocol demands the systematic dismantling of entire planetary bodies. The civilization would deploy automated, self-replicating molecular machinery to mine, pulverize, and process the heavy metals, silicates, and carbon from the dead, rocky planets within their solar system. Mercury, Venus, Mars, and the asteroid belt of a given system would be entirely consumed, stripped down to their molten cores, and converted into vast, gossamer-thin solar arrays and structural tethers spanning millions of miles. This process does not happen overnight. The construction of a stellar megastructure is an architectural endeavor that would span thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of terrestrial years. It is a slow, methodical, and profoundly violent altering of the natural celestial environment. This specific transitional phase of construction perfectly aligns with the chaotic, inexplicable telemetry radiating from KIC 8462852. If a Dyson Swarm were completely finished, a dense spherical web of perfectly spaced solar collectors, the starlight observed from Earth would not fluctuate wildly. It would simply appear permanently dimmed, a uniform reduction in baseline luminosity as the swarm steadily intercepted a fixed percentage of the light. But the Kepler Space Telescope did not record a steady, uniform dimming. It recorded an environment defined by sheer, unadulterated chaos. The erratic dips of 15% and 22% indicate that the shadow is not uniform. The astronomical community is not looking at a completed megastructure. The data suggests they are witnessing a Dyson Swarm actively under construction. During the build phase, the orbital environment around the star would be intensely congested and highly irregular. Massive, sprawling arrays of newly completed solar panels would travel in dense, clustered formations alongside colossal construction platforms, planetary-scale refineries, and sprawling transport networks ferrying refined material across the system. When we analyze the exact geometric shape of the transits recorded by Kepler, the blueprint of this alien architecture begins to reveal itself. A natural planet, being a perfect sphere, creates a smooth, symmetrical U-shape on a light curve. The Day 800 event recorded a massive, highly asymmetrical transit, characterized by a slow, gradual dimming, followed by a sheer, vertical cliff in the data. If an incredibly massive, flat geometric plane, such as a solar collector array, millions of miles wide, passes in front of the star, it does not transit like a sphere. If the array is tilted, or if it is towing a massive network of structural support tethers, the leading edge would cause a diffuse, slow drop in light. As the dense, solid core of the main collector panel crosses the stellar disk, the light would abruptly plummet, creating the exact vertical drop observed by the terrestrial computers. Furthermore, the Day 1500 cluster, where the light jittered erratically at the bottom of a 22% plunge, maps flawlessly onto the transit of an overlapping, uncoordinated fleet of these colossal structures. As thousands of individual, massive panels move across the star in slightly different orbital trajectories, they block out intersecting patches of light, causing the overall luminosity to stagger and jitter in a completely chaotic, non-periodic rhythm. The most profound piece of evidence supporting the megastructure hypothesis is the very data point that destroyed the natural planetary collision models: the absolute absence of a glowing infrared thermal signature. A sprawling cloud of pulverized asteroid dust absorbing 22% of an F-type star's energy would glow fiercely in the infrared spectrum because natural rock is an inefficient thermal sink. It absorbs heat and immediately radiates it as waste. But a machine engineered specifically to harvest a sun operates under entirely different thermodynamic principles. A Dyson Swarm is purposefully designed to capture stellar radiation, perfectly contain it, and immediately convert it into usable directional power. The materials utilized by a Type II civilization would undoubtedly be highly advanced metamaterials, synthetic substances engineered at the atomic level to possess near-perfect energy absorption rates and zero thermal leakage. Instead of allowing waste heat to passively radiate outward into space in all directions, an advanced society would actively manage its thermal exhaust. The captured energy might be utilized to power planetary-scale computational arrays, synthesized directly into stable antimatter for storage, or, crucially, beamed away as highly concentrated, coherent laser energy to other interstellar colonies. If this directed energy exhaust is not pointed precisely at the tiny, distant lens of the Kepler Space Telescope, human instruments would detect absolutely nothing. The star would appear perfectly clean and terrifyingly cold, exactly as KIC 8462852 appears. The complete lack of mathematical periodicity, the jagged, asymmetrical light curves, and the missing thermal waste heat all converge to form a highly specific profile that no natural celestial phenomenon can satisfy. The Kepler telemetry has effectively mapped the silhouette of a stellar-scale engineering project. We are analyzing the shadow of colossal solar cells, dense swarms of energy collectors, and planetary material being actively harvested to construct an architecture that breaks the boundaries of planetary physics. The scientific establishment demands mathematical proof. Yet the data meticulously provided by the cold observation of the automated telescope presents a reality that requires the scientific community to question whether the laws of thermodynamics they rely upon are absolute, or merely the primitive understanding of a civilization that has not yet learned how to harness its own sun. The debate within the astrophysics community became entirely polarized, trapped between an astronomically impossible natural coincidence and an artificial explanation that forces humanity to accept its profound isolation and technological infancy in a vast, heavily engineered universe. The revelation of a physical shadow perfectly mimicking the thermodynamic and geometric profile of a Kardashev Type II megastructure pushed the scientific community to the absolute limit of visual astronomy. The Kepler Space Telescope had reached the end of its observational capacity regarding the star known as KIC 8462852. It had definitively proven the existence of the physical obstruction, but photons of visible light cannot reveal intent. If the anomaly was truly the result of a hyper-advanced intelligence actively engineering their solar system, visual observation was no longer sufficient. The scientific investigation had to transition from the realm of passive observation to the active, desperate search for an electromagnetic heartbeat. If a stellar empire was currently operating 1,470 light-years away, managing a Dyson Swarm composed of millions of independent orbital platforms, immense planetary refineries, and sprawling energy arrays, they would require a localized communications network of staggering complexity. The logistical coordination of such an immense architecture demands the continuous transfer of petabytes of telemetry, the automated orchestration of self-replicating construction drones, and the precise targeting of massive beamed microwave energy relays. This sheer volume of intense technological activity should theoretically produce an ocean of electromagnetic noise, a chaotic storm of radio frequency leakage radiating outward from the star into the deep cosmos. Driven by this logical imperative, the investigation shifted directly to the CT Institute, an organization dedicated entirely to the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. In late 2015, researchers secured critical observation time on the Allen Telescope Array. Located in the remote radio-quiet valleys of the Cascade Mountains in Northern California. The array is a sprawling mechanical forest of 42 massive, highly sensitive radio dishes. These instruments are designed to act in perfect synchronization, creating a single, immensely powerful ear capable of hearing the faintest, most degraded whispers of the universe. The command was given, and the 42 dishes executed a synchronized mechanical pivot, turning their blind faces away from the general celestial background and locking directly onto the precise coordinates of the Cygnus constellation. They were not looking for a deliberate, welcoming message broadcast toward Earth. The odds of a Type II civilization actively attempting to communicate with a primitive, Type 0 planetary society are essentially non-existent. Instead, the astronomers were attempting to intercept the mundane, everyday technological exhaust of a busy stellar empire. The observation parameters were meticulously calibrated. The array scanned millions of individual radio channels simultaneously, focusing intensely on the microwave window between 1 and 10 gigahertz. This specific frequency range is critically important in radio astronomy because it represents a naturally quiet sector of the electromagnetic spectrum, a serene valley of silence where the violent, roaring background radiation of quasars, pulsars, and the ambient hum of the Milky Way galaxy are mathematically muted. The terrestrial computers were programmed to search for two distinct categories of electromagnetic signatures. The first was narrow-band signals. These are hyper-compressed, highly structured, and entirely artificial frequencies utilized strictly for rapid, long-distance communication. The natural universe, with all of its chaotic stellar collisions and collapsing supernovas, does not produce narrow-band radio waves. The detection of a single, continuous, narrow-band frequency would be absolute, undeniable proof of a synthetic transmitter. The second category was broadband emission. Astronomers hypothesized that if a civilization was actively beaming gigawatts of harvested stellar energy from their massive solar collectors directly to their planetary habitats using intense microwave lasers, a fraction of that energy beam would inevitably miss its target, spilling out into the void as a massive, localized pulse of broadband radiation. For weeks, the massive servers in California processed billions of gigabytes of raw telemetry, sifting meticulously through the freezing static of deep space, desperately waiting for the software to flag the undeniable mathematical rhythm of an artificial presence. The scientific world waited with bated breath, entirely prepared for the exact moment humanity would finally lose its cosmic innocence. What the Allen Telescope Array ultimately found, however, was perhaps more terrifying and profoundly more isolating than any intercepted transmission. They found absolute, unbroken silence. The void surrounding KIC 8462852 was completely dead in the radio spectrum. There was no localized chatter. There was no narrow-band telemetry coordinating a fleet of massive megastructures. There were no massive pulses of stray microwave energy illuminating the dark. The distant F-type star was burning. The immense, irregular shadows were still violently obscuring the light in the Kepler data, but the surrounding environment itself was entirely devoid of the electromagnetic signature of life. When the data was published, a wave of profound relief washed over the conservative factions of the astrophysical community. The total absence of radio signals was immediately weaponized as definitive proof that the megastructure hypothesis was nothing more than a sensationalized fantasy, and that the massive shadows, despite breaking the known laws of thermodynamics, must simply be the result of cold, dead, natural rocks. However, to interpret this radio silence as the definitive absence of a highly advanced intelligence is to commit a profound failure of human imagination. It is a biological arrogance that assumes an entity capable of enclosing a star would utilize the exact same primitive communication protocols developed by humans merely a century ago. Radio technology is strictly bound by the absolute speed limit of the universe, the speed of light. While it seems instantaneous on Earth, a radio wave requires over 8 hours just to cross the diameter of our own small solar system. For a Kardashev Type II civilization managing an empire spanning billions of miles, relying on radio waves would be paralyzingly slow, the logistical equivalent of attempting to run a modern, globalized internet using carrier pigeons. It is entirely probable, and mathematically likely, that an intelligence operating at that magnitude abandoned the electromagnetic spectrum for communication millions of years ago. They might be utilizing tightly focused, entirely invisible optical lasers, manipulating the highly elusive neutrino particle to punch dense messages directly through the solid cores of planets. Or perhaps they have mastered the quantum fabric of space-time itself, utilizing quantum entanglement to achieve instantaneous, zero-latency communication across the vast void. If they are speaking in the language of manipulated gravity or entangled particles, our massive, expensive radio dishes in California are as useless as a deaf man trying to listen to a symphony. Furthermore, we must confront the terrifying reality of deep time and the vast temporal delay of the cosmos. Because the star is located 1,470 light-years away, the Allen telescope array was not actually listening to the present moment. The 42 dishes were capturing radiation that left the star during the temporal equivalent of the fall of the Roman Empire on Earth. We are observing a ghost. If the Type II civilization had successfully completed the construction of their Dyson Swarm during that 1400-year transit time, they would have achieved near-perfect thermodynamic efficiency, entirely sealing the star and ensuring absolutely zero energy or radio leakage escaped into the surrounding vacuum. Alternatively, the silence could point to a much darker, far more tragic conclusion. The chaotic, irregular shadows might not be the silhouette of an active construction site, but the sprawling, unmaintained wreckage of a dead empire. The advanced civilization that built the machines may have gone extinct millions of years ago, completely destroyed by an internal cataclysm, an engineered biological plague, or a highly advanced technological singularity they could no longer control. What the Kepler Space Telescope recorded might simply be the automated, decaying solar collectors, blindly and mindlessly continuing to orbit their host star long after their creators faded into the dark. In this scenario, there is no radio traffic to intercept because there is no one left to speak. The megastructure is merely an ancient, silent tomb drifting aimlessly through the abyss. The anomaly of Tabby's star leaves humanity suspended in a terrifying and beautiful state of cosmic vertigo. The rigorous, heavily scrutinized visual data collected by the Kepler mission remains an objective, unyielding mathematical reality. An isolated, mature star is being periodically swallowed by an entity that defies every established natural law of physics. An entity massive enough to block a quarter of a sun, yet entirely devoid of the thermal radiation required by the universe. We are left staring at a magnificent silhouette painted across the void, trapped indefinitely between two profoundly unsettling conclusions. It might be an incredibly rare, perfectly orchestrated natural illusion, a violent convergence of shattered cosmic debris so statistically improbable that it borders on the supernatural, exposing the severe limitations of our own scientific models. Or we are looking at the literal physical architecture of gods, an intelligence that has fully conquered its environment and operates in a realm of engineering we have yet to even dream of. The universe does not owe us a comforting explanation. It merely presents the raw, uncompromising evidence and leaves us in the dark, forcing us to grapple with the profound mystery of our own existence and our deeply isolated place in the cosmos. The transition from visual astronomy to the realm of radio frequency observation marks the profound boundary between passively observing a shadow and actively hunting for a mind. The Kepler Space Telescope had mapped the physical dimensions of the anomaly surrounding KIC 8462852, proving beyond any mathematical doubt that an immense, irregular, and thermally invisible entity was periodically eclipsing a massive sun. Yet a shadow, regardless of its geometric complexity, cannot speak. To definitively classify this obstruction as the engineered architecture of a Kardashev Type II civilization, the scientific establishment required a techno-signature, an undeniable electromagnetic heartbeat radiating from the dark. This absolute necessity triggered the intervention of the SETI Institute and the deployment of the Allen Telescope Array, a sprawling mechanical forest of 42 highly sensitive radio dishes situated in the radio-quiet valleys of the Cascade Mountains. When astronomers synchronized these immense terrestrial ears and locked their coordinates onto the Cygnus constellation, they were not engaging in the naive pursuit of a welcoming interstellar greeting. The probability of a hyper-advanced stellar empire actively broadcasting an omnidirectional beacon toward a primitive, technologically nascent planet like Earth is a statistical zero. Instead, the objective was strictly forensic. The array was programmed to eavesdrop on the ambient, unintentional technological exhaust of a busy, industrialized solar system. The theoretical framework dictated that a civilization capable of mining entire planets and deploying millions of orbital solar collectors would require a communications network of incomprehensible density. The automated orchestration of self-replicating construction drones, the continuous transfer of petabytes of telemetry across millions of miles of vacuum, and the precise targeting of massive beamed microwave energy relays should theoretically generate a chaotic storm of radio frequency leakage. To capture this leakage, the terrestrial computers were strictly calibrated to monitor the microwave window between 1 and 10 gigahertz. In the discipline of radio astronomy, this specific frequency band is known as the waterhole. It is a naturally serene valley within the electromagnetic spectrum, a quiet, acoustic zone situated between the loud, ambient background noise of the Milky Way galaxy and the disruptive emission lines of cosmic hydrogen and hydroxyl. If a synthetic intelligence were utilizing radio waves, or if their industrial machinery was bleeding stray energy into the void, this is the precise frequency range where the signal would travel the farthest without suffering severe degradation. The automated algorithms processed billions of gigabytes of raw telemetry, meticulously filtering the freezing static of deep space, searching specifically for narrow-band emissions. The natural universe, despite its violent stellar collisions, collapsing quasars and spinning pulsars, is entirely incapable of producing a narrow-band radio wave. A tightly compressed, continuous frequency is the absolute, irrefutable signature of an artificial transmitter. For weeks, the scientific community lingered in a state of suspended animation, anticipating the exact mathematical pulse that would permanently shatter human isolation and relegate terrestrial history to a mere footnote in a populated cosmos. The data processing eventually concluded, delivering a verdict that resonated with a profoundly chilling finality. The Allen Telescope Array detected absolute, unbroken silence. There was no localized radio chatter. There were no narrow-band telemetry signals coordinating a fleet of megastructures. There were no massive overlapping pulses of stray microwave energy illuminating the dark sector around the F-type star. The void was completely dead in the radio spectrum. This total absence of an electromagnetic heartbeat was immediately seized upon by conservative factions within the astrophysical community, weaponized as definitive empirical proof that the Dyson Swarm hypothesis was a sensationalized mathematical fantasy. The silence was interpreted as an absolute validation of the natural models, forcing the narrative back toward the statistically absurd, highly improbable swarms of disintegrating comets. However, to accept this radio silence as the definitive absence of an advanced intelligence is to surrender to a profound biological arrogance. It is a dangerous assumption that an intelligence capable of fundamentally re-engineering the thermodynamic architecture of a solar system would communicate using the exact same primitive, easily intercepted electromagnetic protocols developed by humanity merely a century ago. Radio technology is severely constrained by the immutable physical laws of the universe, specifically the speed of light. While radio transmission appears instantaneous on a small terrestrial sphere, it requires over 8 hours simply to cross the diameter of our own local solar system. For a Kardashev Type II civilization managing an interconnected, sprawling empire that spans billions of miles, relying on radio waves would induce a paralyzing logistical latency. It is the cosmic equivalent of attempting to run a modern, high-speed global financial network using paper letters transported by horseback. It is mathematically highly probable that an intelligence operating at that magnitude of energy consumption abandoned the electromagnetic radio spectrum millions of years prior. To coordinate a Dyson Swarm, they would likely utilize tightly focused, entirely invisible optical lasers, establishing a heavily encrypted, high-bandwidth point-to-point network that spills absolutely zero stray light into the surrounding vacuum for human instruments to intercept. Furthermore, theoretical physics suggests they may have mastered mediums of communication that completely bypass our current technological comprehension, such as manipulating the highly elusive neutrino particle to punch dense data streams directly through the solid, molten cores of planets, or utilizing the quantum entanglement of subatomic particles to achieve instantaneous, zero-latency communication across the vast, expanding void, entirely independent of the speed of light. If the architects of KIC 8462852 are speaking in the silent, invisible language of manipulated gravity or entangled quantum states, our massive, expensive radio dishes in California are fundamentally useless, pointing blindly into the dark like a deaf organism attempting to process a symphony. We must also confront the terrifying, inescapable reality of deep time and the vast temporal delay inherent in cosmic observation. Because this specific star is located 1,470 light-years away from our solar system, the Allen telescope array was not actively listening to the present moment. The 42 radio dishes were capturing ancient radiation that departed the star during the temporal equivalent of the fall of the Western Roman Empire on Earth. We are observing an incredibly delayed ghost. If the hypothetical Type II civilization had successfully completed the construction phase of their Dyson Swarm during that 1400-year transit time, they would have achieved a state of near-perfect thermodynamic efficiency. A completed, optimized stellar megastructure is a closed loop. It entirely seals the star, ensuring that absolutely zero usable energy, including radio frequency leakage, escapes outward into the useless void. In this scenario, the silence is not proof of their absence, it is proof of their absolute engineering perfection. However, the exact same mathematical parameters allow for a much darker, far more tragic conclusion that touches upon the most deeply rooted fears of modern astrobiology. This concept is encapsulated in the Great Filter hypothesis, a theoretical framework attempting to explain the profound silence of the universe. The Great Filter proposes that as any biological species evolves, technological acceleration eventually outpaces moral and societal development, providing the civilization with the absolute means of self-destruction before they can establish a permanent, secure foothold across multiple star systems. The chaotic, irregular shadows violently obscuring the light of KIC 462852 might not be the active silhouette of a thriving construction site. They could be the sprawling, unmaintained, and slowly degrading wreckage of a dead empire. The highly advanced intelligence that mined the planets and built the machines may have gone completely extinct millions of years ago, entirely erased by an internal, planetary-scale cataclysm, an engineered, highly lethal biological plague, or the uncontrolled detonation of an artificial superintelligence they created but could no longer contain. What the Kepler Space Telescope recorded might simply be their automated, mindless solar collectors. Vast fleets of crumbling solar sails and shattered energy arrays blindly continuing to orbit their host star, slowly falling out of synchronized alignment long after their creators faded into the eternal dark. In this grim scenario, there is no radio traffic to intercept because there is no biological or synthetic entity left alive to speak. The megastructure is merely an ancient, silent tomb drifting aimlessly through the freezing abyss, casting a massive, meaningless shadow over a dying sun. The anomaly of Tabby's star leaves humanity indefinitely suspended in a terrifying state of cosmic vertigo. The rigorous, heavily scrutinized visual telemetry collected by the automated observation mission remains an objective, unyielding mathematical reality that cannot be erased or ignored. An isolated, mature F-type star is being periodically swallowed by an entity that actively defies every established natural law of celestial mechanics, an entity massive enough to block nearly a quarter of a sun, yet entirely devoid of the thermal waste heat required by the foundational laws of thermodynamics. We are left staring directly at a magnificent, inexplicable silhouette painted across the void, trapped without a definitive resolution between two profoundly unsettling conclusions. We are either observing an incredibly rare, perfectly orchestrated natural illusion, a violent, coincidental convergence of shattered cosmic debris so statistically improbable that it borders on the supernatural, exposing the severe, humiliating limitations of our own scientific models. Or we are looking at the literal, physical architecture of a supreme cosmic intelligence, an entity that has fully conquered its environment and operates in a realm of engineering we have yet to even dream of, rendering our entire terrestrial existence profoundly insignificant. The universe, in its cold, majestic indifference, does not owe humanity a comforting explanation. It merely presents the raw, uncompromising evidence and leaves us standing in the dark, forcing us to grapple with the profound mystery of our own isolated existence and our deeply fragile place in the silent cosmos.